You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to another episode of Autumn on the Air. I'm your host, Lisa Mueller, and today we have an exciting episode focused on innovation, organizational growth, and the commercialization of emerging technologies. Our special guest is Pam Henderson, an accomplished author, entrepreneur, CEO, professor, and speaker in business and innovation strategy. Pam is the founder of NewEdge, a growth strategy firm that anchors growth in opportunity. Pam has an impressive background in academia and industry, with her work featured in the Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, and NPR. Welcome, Pam. I'm so excited to have you here on the air.
Oh, it's so great to be here, Lisa. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us today. And I wanted to start off by asking you if you could share a little bit about your journey from academia to founding NewEdge and what inspired you to make that transition.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So I started out as a professor at Carnegie Mellon. I thought I had died and gone to academic heaven, which I really had. But then my husband, who is a PhD surface scientist, got a position at Pacific Northwest National Lab. He's got very expensive toys. So we moved out here. I went on the faculty at Washington State University, which was a great position. And then the lab called and asked me to help them with commercializing early stage technologies. And I, of course, said yes, but really had no idea how I was going to do this. And I had these wonderful MBA students that have PhDs in the sciences. And I just kind of gave them some principles, launched them out there, helped them kind of discover how to find opportunities for these early stage technologies. And after several years, I saw a lot of patterns in that, built a methodology around it. And I saw that these companies that were getting spun out were really successful. And I thought, well, I'm probably making about $5 an hour at the university. I should start a company on the side. And I thought, that'll be easy. Not easy. But I started it on the side. I had actually moved to halftime at the university, and I started it on the side, and then it started to grow. And so that's when I made that transition.
Well, it's very clear based on your bio, your work has had an incredibly broad impact. You've developed the opportunity thinking approach. Can you explain to us a little bit about what that is and how it differs from traditional idea-based innovation strategies?
Yeah. So as we know, when we think about creativity, people think about, what's the big idea? In fact, the symbol of an idea is the light bulb. And while ideas are great and we need that creativity, I certainly don't ever want that to go away. The truth is that we can have a lot of ideas that don't actually land very well in the market. It can take over 3,000 ideas to get to 100 projects in a company, to get to only 2 things that go to market, only one of which does better than break even. And so those odds aren't real great. What I found was that what was often missing when I was talking to these early entrepreneurs and then on to even bigger companies was that they weren't really clear what the opportunity was. And the opportunity lies outside of the organization. Our ideas are in our head, but really those ideas are meant to serve the needs of the market. And so getting clear on those was the key to getting to better ideas.
Now, that's a great segue, talking about ideas and opportunities, because your book, You Can Kill an Idea, but You Can't Kill an Opportunity, offers some fascinating insights into innovation. In fact, in your book, you mentioned that ideas alone are failing us, which is what you just alluded to. Can you elaborate on why defining the opportunity first increases the odds for success?
Yes. So what I found, and I found this for myself, I'm an idea person. I have ideation as one of my strengths. And yet what happens when we're doing ideas is we get really excited about those ideas. But when we define the broader opportunity, we start to get better insights on what really might work. But to do that, we have to understand what an opportunity is. Now, the first time I said you can kill an idea, you can't kill an opportunity, I was trying to be snarky and poke the bear. I had a client that was really fixated on ideas, and I was trying to get them to switch their thinking. And they got so excited about that, and people subsequently did that became the title. Now, what I found, though, was that it's not just enough to say, oh, you can't be just thinking about ideas. We have to think about opportunity. You have to define what an opportunity is. And when you ask, a dozen people, what is an opportunity, they'll define it lots of different ways. One person might say, oh, it's a market need. Somebody else might say it's a profit pool. Somebody else might say it's this really cool technology, and somebody else might say it's this big trend. And the reality is they're all correct. The word opportunity comes from the word port. Next time you see the word opportunity, you'll see the little word port in there. It actually meant into port. It was Latin. And it was about a boat getting into port. And the sailors would call out as they approached the port, ab portu. Now, as a business professor, I would have thought, oh, they must have been announcing the port. That's the market with the needs. And while that's part of it, it wasn't what they were talking about. So then you might think, well, they must be announcing the boat with all the goods on it. And those are all the technologies that had been developed. Also part of it, not what they were talking about. They were talking about the tide and the wind, which were the weather conditions that allowed that boat to make it the final mile into port. I think it's a beautiful picture of the combination of the need in the market, the right value propositions that we have on our boat and our vehicle to market, and the conditions, the tide and wind that get us to market. And when you put all three of those together, you actually have a strategic opportunity worth pursuing.
Yeah, that's very elegant, the way you just described that. And this whole idea of killing ideas but not killing opportunities is really a very powerful shift in thinking. And in your book, you also talk about the inefficiency of the idea to launch process that is used in many companies. What are some strategies that can be used to improve this and increase the speed to mark for various products?
Yeah, it's a couple of questions there. To improve, I think we really need to get clear on what is that need, what are the ways to create value, and what are the conditions. If we start with the conditions, which is the trends, that's the best place to start. Let's just look broadly out there. What's going on in the world? Let's make sure that we look at adjacent trends, not just close in. We can talk about that more in a minute. But let's get clear on the trends. They give us kind of a big ballpark of where there might be opportunity. Now that we have that ballpark, we can start to dig into some interesting areas. We can start to look at the needs in those different market spaces. And then once we do that, we can also look at how could we create value. And the way that we create value is through a range of technologies. Now, we might have fallen in love with our technology and want our technology to be the one that wins, but we have to look at that landscape of technologies. When we bring all those three elements together and almost keep them on an even playing field, because I said it sequentially, the reality is these things need to have their own day in the sun. It is market pull, it is tech push, and it's that marriage that gets us to the greatest breakthrough.
So another thing that's really important and critical in today's fast-paced world is speed to market. Now, opportunity thinking taps into 6 sources, which are market forces, business models, technology, organizations, environments, and design. Can you share an example how integrating these sources led to a successful innovation?
Sure. I'll use a really famous one, which is the iPod, and plenty of people have talked about it. Before Apple's iPod, there had been, digital ways of gathering up music, and they had really not done very well. And it's because it was a singular product. Now, was the technology good? It was fabulous. Was it the right technology for the right time? Absolutely. What was the problem? They didn't have some of the other surrounding things. So let's talk about that 6-source model you just described. If we look at the ways that we can create value, and I said, there's this formula for opportunity, the needs, the value creators, and the conditions, but we can bust that out and expand it a little bit. So let's look at ways to create value. We create value through our technologies, but we can also create value through kind of our brand and design, and then also through our business model. And so what Apple did was they created a new business model that allowed us to get singular songs rather than entire albums. They created a business model with the broader ecosystem of, musicians. And they looked at also the needs of those musicians. Now, you could argue that this hasn't been beneficial for some of the musicians, and I would agree, but I think that is evolving. But when we look at the needs in the market, they really looked at the needs of the individuals. People didn't want to buy a full album. They wanted music on the go. They didn't want things that could get scratched. So they built their technology and their business model around that. They looked at the larger environment of how music was changing and helped change the business model there. And then they built an organization around it that eventually even led to things like apps. So by blowing out something beyond an individual technology, the technology was failing, but the larger opportunity was to build out this set of these different 6 sources. Now, sometimes, and you mentioned speed, I do want to go to that. Sometimes it can feel like you're stepping back to go forward. After all, we ultimately take an idea to market, but stepping back to look at the opportunity can cause some people to feel like, well, I don't have time to do that. I have to move more quickly. But we found that the concept of go slow to go fast is so true. What would I rather do? Would I rather launch product after product only to have my organization lose interest in the opportunity? Or would I rather take some of that precious time? It might only be 6 to 8 weeks, and take a minute to look at the opportunity and then build the technologies accordingly. We've got some great stories around that as well that I'm happy to share.
Yeah, I'd love to hear if you've got some other ones that you'd like to share on that concept.
Yeah, one was it's a great technology story and a great brand company story. So there's this little company named Kokona. They had a polymer fiber. When you put coconut shell in it, burnt coconut shell, I don't know why it has to be coconut shell, but anyway, it would create this fiber that was almost like a Swiss cheese. Well, if you made a shirt out of this entire fiber, that surface area on that shirt would actually be the size of a football field.
Oh, wow.
All the nooks and crannies. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, the benefit of that is that when you sweat, it displaces the liquid. It doesn't wick it, but it displaces it and it evaporates faster. Well, they were interested in a partnership with the North Face and vice versa, but both were very concerned about doing something where it might just result in one shirt with a fancy hang tag explaining it, sitting in, REI and nobody really even notices it. They wanted it to be a big launch that warranted exclusivity. So they asked us to help them bring the two companies together. There was just an NDA at the beginning of this. And normally these open innovation partnerships take a lot longer than just doing it yourself. Well, we did the first session. It was a couple days. We had a bunch of what we call ecosystem members in there. So they're people that are out there observing the opportunities. We had a sports writer. We had Conrad Anker, who's, climbed mountain, has climbed Mount Everest, famous mountain climber, and a number of different people in there that could advise us. And what we heard from those folks and sponsored athletes was stop talking about moisture wicking, stop talking about all the things that we hear about. Let's talk about temperature. Because ultimately, it's maintain our core temperature. It's not about the moisture, it's about the temperature. And so this became such an exciting flip of a storyline, completely opposite of how both companies were pursuing it, that we then did another session a few weeks later, again, just a couple days session where we built out, the opportunities and the ideas, tested them that night with sponsored athletes, did it the next day, tested it at night with just kind of regular off the street athletes. And through these sessions, we ended identifying several opportunity spaces, one of which was to get the North Face into those mid-seasons of fall and spring where they really weren't playing, and to get them into base layers where Under Armour had kind of, beat them. And so it opened up huge opportunities for the North Face. They got into the base layer, they got into running, they got into these mid-season plays, huge opportunity for Kokona, so much so they were able to get to market in 8 months from the day that we started.
That's incredible. That's really fast.
It was, and a lot of credit to them for sure. It was their biggest launch ever. They called it Flash Dry. It was an absolutely massive launch. And then Kokona went on, renamed their company 37.5, and identified opportunities for temperature-related fabrics in sheeting, men's clothing, a bunch of different areas. So it's been a massive growth opportunity. But interestingly, we found that sometimes going fast helps you because we smashed together all these people in the ecosystem and these consumers all in these 2-day sessions. And all of a sudden you get all the sparks flying, you hear everything at the same time. And so again, like sometimes it feels like we're going to go slower, but if you smash things together, you get those sparks flying between the need, the value creators, and the conditions.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've seen some tremendous impact in these organizations that have adopted opportunity thinking in terms of their innovation and growth. Share with us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I'm going to give an example from Harley-Davidson. Harley came to us. They had their first electric vehicle, which might not sound very exciting for Harley, but it was very exciting because getting rid of the clutch actually made the ride quite a bit more exciting, interestingly. And they were able to build an electric bike that was very much more like an electric guitar than an electric car. So very exciting. But they didn't know where to go with it. And so we stepped back and we said, well, where does this fit into your overall strategy? We built out the opportunities for Harley as a whole, and it had benefits for Harley in a number of ways. One, the C-suite could see kind of everything that was going on all at once. They could see the big opportunities where Harley was playing, and they could see how electrification ran across them and then was also an opportunity in and of itself. Now, at the product development level, it helped those folks because they were able to see a broader range of places to play for electrification. In fact, we even said to them, you guys should buy an electric bicycle company. And they all kind of laughed at us at first, but eventually bought one. And they bought one because they saw the broader play for electrification and how it was going to impact mobility and how they could do it the Harley way. And then it helped the folks that were actually down in design because they took kind of the ethos of that opportunity, and they made sure that they stayed true to it throughout the entire development process. They never forgot who the key customer was and what their needs were and what the trends were. And what we find is that sometimes you can have strategy people that will do the opportunity work, but by the time it gets to the product development people or the marketing people, maybe some of those insights have gotten lost in the shuffle. And so staying true to the opportunity tends to lead to bigger ideas that get to market.
That's really, really fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to jump to one of the services that NewEdge offers, which is voice of the ecosystem. Tell us how this approach differs from the traditional voice of the customer and why this is important for long-term success.
Great question. If you ask a lot of folks how they're getting their insights, they'll tell you they might be doing surveys, hearing back from their salespeople, or maybe doing something more rigorous like a true voice of the customer, where perhaps they're doing in-depth interviews. And all of that is very good. The problem is that customers, especially when you look at the mean rather than maybe the variance, they'll tell you the same thing. They want maybe an improvement in the current product. They maybe want a price change. But it's just like Henry Ford said, if I asked people what they wanted, they'd tell me a faster horse. They wouldn't have told me a car. So how do you get those insights around what the next transportation is, the car rather than the horse? Well, we found that what we would call the ecosystem are kind of like the people that sit on top of the mountain that can see farther. And we define those folks as people that, yes, they participate in the behaviors we care about, but maybe they just influence them, or maybe they observe them. So they could be people in the media, in trade publications, in regulatory areas. A fun example is some work that we did for Kellogg's. They were looking to try to do snacks for children, and they came to us and they said, we can't figure it out. We need healthy snacks for kids. We've talked to moms, we've talked to, kids, we've talked to principals in schools. And so we kind of scratched our head and so who are we going to talk to if we're not going to be talking to the people that are managing the school lunch program? Well, we did talk to all those folks. We talked to the people that were serving lunch, but the breakthrough came when we talked to janitors. And they walked us over to this trash can full of perfect Washington State apples. Now, Mom was happy. There was a newsletter that said that apple was on the menu. Principal was happy. They were following regulations. The lunch person in the hairnet was happy. They're delivering good food to kids. The kid's happy. They have a projectile. No one, and I mean no one, is getting healthier. The aha was that we had to put the play value of the food ahead of the nutrition.
Wow.
Yes, it was great. And you could kind of look back and say, well, of course, but it wasn't an of course. If the of course was, hey, we need to make more nutritious food, let's go make more nutritious food. This was, no, let's find the most playful food we can make and then make it more nutritious.
That's really an interesting way of thinking and approaching a problem like that. Fascinating and very interesting that those insights came from the janitor, and very, very unique approach. And, every strategy, Pam, has challenges, as I'm sure you're well aware. So what are some of the common strategies companies face when trying to implement opportunity thinking, and how can they overcome them?
Well, it's a great question because we can do lots of great work with our clients and set up these opportunities. But if they don't really get implemented in the organization, there's not going to be the rewards. One of the things that we learned was that a lot of strategy work, particularly done by consultants, is done a little bit in small groups behind closed doors. And then they try to do this big effort to roll it out to people, only to have people feel like it's the new flavor of the month. What we've found is we've applied design thinking to how we do our strategy work. We engage a large number of people. We have workshop settings. We put charts up on all the walls. We visualize things. We have people react to stuff. We get them into a creative mode when they're doing business strategy. And what that does is it wins their hearts. We may have 40, 50 people involved in a strategy workshop to identify the big opportunities, and we may have hundreds more involved in doing trends homework where they get to say which trends they think are more important. What that means is once that strategy is rolled out, everybody can see their fingerprints on it. So that's one thing to avoid that flavor of the month feeling. Another thing is to think about how you're organized. Organizations typically, and for good reason, organize around functions. They have marketing and accounting and R&D, and those functions need to be there to drive, consistent, good practice, efficiencies, staff development, all those great things. But teams need to organize, and work needs to be organized around the opportunities themselves. We worked with a faucet company that did a stellar job of this. Once they got the opportunities back, they kept the functions for obvious managerial reasons, but they matrixed people in all around the opportunity areas. So from the very front end all the way through to delivery of product to market, there were entire teams just focused on those single opportunities. And by doing that, you lock those opportunities in for a longer period of time. We've had organizations keep those opportunity playbooks for as long as 18 years. We'll go back into an organization and still find that playbook on someone's desk 18 years later. And I think that that's a lot about how do you make it sticky?
So I wanted to ask you about overcoming obstacles because that's crucial for success. And in particular, I wanted to ask you about organizational growth and leadership. What are some of the key leadership principles you followed while growing NewEdge?
Well, I'll talk about NewEdge, but I want to also talk to one principle I've seen with our clients, and I think it's true in life in general, is that people confuse risk aversion with uncertainty aversion. They both feel creepy. Nobody likes the feeling of either one. But a lot of companies will say, hey, we're not going to do this, or we're scared to do this because we're risk averse. And I look and I'm like, you're not risk averse. You just put a plant in Southeast Asia. You're brave. You just know how to do the math on the risk. The problem is that you're uncertainty averse, which means you may be willing to put a plant in Southeast Asia, but you might not be willing to spend $50,000 on an opportunity with a startup. Why is that? It's because you have no knowledge in that startup area. One of the things we've found is that we can work on uncertainty aversion by getting people more familiar with opportunities. So one of the things we'll do is we'll take executives and we'll expose them to this broader ecosystem that I mentioned, startups and various experts and so forth, but not like an expert panel. We'll have them all roll up their sleeves together and collaborate on defining opportunities and defining ideas. And that collaboration allows them to learn so much about those market spaces, what will work, what might not work. And it reduces their uncertainty and allows them to feel more comfortable with making decisions on small bets. So that's one principle. The other principle I would say is that there's probably nothing more important than culture. Now, I did not start my company thinking that. I started thinking around strategy. But I've come to conclude that the most important thing is culture. And there's a great phrase by Peter Drucker that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, it's true. You can have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you don't have the right culture, all of the different bugs will come out. Nothing's going to happen. And so I think that working on culture has been probably what's made me most proud in my organization. And we can certainly talk more about ways to do that, but I think understanding culture and making sure you have the right culture is the key.
Share with us, what have you done within your own company to kind of foster a culture, particularly a culture of innovation, and what have you seen that works?
Well, we have actually brought in consultants, and we brought in one consultant who helped us really identify our values. And it turns out that in a lot of companies, the values come from the founder. So a number of us got together that have been here for a while, myself and some of my team, and we wrote down what we thought our value were, and the consultant helped us kind of clean them up. And the key is to make them really interesting and really true to who you are. And so I can go through our values. One is driven improver. We love people that are driven. We love continuous improvement. That's a core value of ours. Another one is team first. Everything has to be about the team before I, we before I. Another one is grounded provocateurs, which means we want to be provocateurs for ourselves, for our clients, with each other, but we need to have that information grounded in data. Another one is teachable trust builders, and that's a lot about I want to be both a teacher and a learner at all times. And in order to build trust, which I believe is probably the most important value in a culture, we have to be willing to be honest at times and also receive honest feedback. And then another one is a little spicier. It's finish it strong, but we call it finish shit strong. And in that, it's really about, hey, we love to start things. We're all very creative, but we need to make sure that we're landing the plane and finishing things strong. Now, the key is we don't just have those values, publish them, on our internet, and that's it. They're on our walls. They're in our weekly meetings. They're how we're doing our annual reviews, and they're how we're hiring people. So they are the governing force. And when we see something getting off kilter, because watching a culture is you have to watch it at all times, and you have to reinforce it at all times. But I have found that culture is our very best management tool because culture norms behaviors when no one else is looking. So if you want a healthy culture where people are happy to come to work, they're at their best, they're creative, and they personally can grow, what you have to do is have it be a culture that everybody owns. And that does require constant reinforcement.
Yeah, it almost sounds like tending to a garden in a way. You've got to constantly, be, watering and fertilizing and weeding your garden in order for it to thrive and to grow.
I love that analogy. I think I'm going to take that back because that is exactly what it is. And sometimes the weeding is, when somebody is dissatisfied, understanding it quickly and trying to work to resolve those things quickly before those weeds grow.
Yeah, because if you don't, take the time and do the weeding, nobody likes to do the weeding, right? The weeds will smother and strangle the plants and then nothing's going to grow. So to your point.
Yes.
So,
yeah, that's a great analogy. And then the watering it is fun because then we get to have, parties. We have a weekly culture event where each person takes a different value. And in the weekly huddle where we all get together for, an hour a week, one person leads a culture moment where they're talking about that value and maybe what it means to them, or they're doing a little game or whatever. And so everybody is responsible for doing these culture moments throughout the year.
And that's great because you include everybody. Everybody feels like they belong and they're contributing to tending that garden, so to speak. So that's really awesome.
Yes, exactly.
So Pam, I wanted to ask you as the podcast comes to a close, what are some of the emerging trends in innovation and growth strategies that you think tech transfer professionals should keep an eye on?
I love that question. I think co-innovation is the one I would mention. Companies are starting to realize that they cannot solve the bigger systemic problems, particularly in areas like sustainability, but also energy, electrification, changing our economy from oil-based to electric-based from non-sustainable products to sustainable products. These are not small things. Changing our healthcare systems, evolving, using AI and the way AI is going to affect us. These things are systemic changes. And in order to do that, companies are realizing they're going to have to collaborate more. And I do think that that's a real challenge for tech transfer. I think they have everything that they need to be able to do it, but probably budget. And the limitations in their budgets and their ability to engage with people, I think, can slow down that co-innovation. But we have companies, and I've been pitching this to them for a while, and they're starting to listen, talk to us about even collaborating with competitors. And a great example of that is the Coca-Cola plant bottle. Coca-Cola went out there with a non-competitive company, started to create this, plastic that only had a little tiny bit of cellulosic material in it at first. Now that content, recycled content and cellulosic content is increasing, and now Pepsi's working with them. But we're going to see more and more companies collaborating with each other. And I do think that that's maybe not today, but that is on the horizon that I think tech transfer people need to start engaging with and understanding, how do we define our ecosystem? How do we engage with them, and so forth.
Well, Pam, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all your expertise with us today.
Well, I'm really grateful for the interest, and very grateful you've got great questions, and we welcome, talking to people. We have videos, we have all kinds of things that are educational sources. I'm still kind of a professor at heart, that are free to people. So more than happy to have people connect with us. At our website is new-edge.com. And if folks go there, they'll start to see a lot of video content that might be helpful to them.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much again, Pam. This has been great.
Thank you, Lisa.
And that wraps up today's episode of Autumn on the Air. A huge thank you to Pam for joining us and providing such valuable insights into innovation, organizational growth, and the commercialization of emerging technologies. If you'd like to learn more about Pam's work, you can read her book, You Can Kill an Idea, but You Can't Kill an Opportunity. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on Autumn on the Air.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.